whenever you engage in mediation, there's always a reputational risk that's involved. If the negotiations fall, the different sides could turn around and blame the negotiator. Or if your bench isn't deep enough in terms of having enough negotiators or having an accurate understanding of the cases. But in this particular case, given that there's been other parties that have been involved, the French, the Egyptians, the Americans, I think Qatar is pretty well covered if the negotiations tragically don't result in an end in the conflict.
President Joe Biden has warned all sides involved in the negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire deal not to undermine the efforts that are being made, saying that an agreement is now closer than ever. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy's been in Qatar and says he's hopeful Israel and Hamas are on the cusp of a deal. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken may also visit Doha. He is in the Middle East. He'll be going to Israel, in fact, today. So what role does Qatar have in achieving a deal? It's been the place, the staging for a lot of these conversations. We're joined now by Mehran Kamrava, a professor of government at Georgetown University in Doha. Professor Kamrava, good morning. Welcome to the programme.
Good morning. Good to be here.
It's very good to speak to you. I'm fascinated by the role of Qatar in all of this. It has been the location for a lot of the negotiation. And I just wonder if you feel like they have been the right sort of place for this to happen, the right mediator in this sort of circumstance.
Well, Qatar is the only country, or one of the very few countries in the world, that speaks to both Hamas and indirectly to Israel, and of course directly to the United States. So it is well positioned to play a mediating role. And just in addition to that, Qatar has long made mediation one of the central pillars of its foreign policy. In fact, it's become part of its diplomatic identity. So it's well positioned to play that role.
And has it played it well?
That's a really good question, but one that's hard to answer. There are some conflicts that are easier to mediate as compared to others. This is not a conflict that has been easy to mediate. It's a conflict in which the two parties are very far apart from one another. It doesn't appear as if Netanyahu really wants negotiations to succeed. It doesn't appear as if Hamas is in a position to make any concessions, doesn't have too many bargaining chips. So this is a particularly intractable conflict for Qatar to have been involved in.
Yeah. Their role sort of politically is also interesting in Qatar, isn't it? Because of the suggestions that actually there are some very high-profile members of Hamas. Indeed, the political office, I believe, has been in Qatar since 2012. Is that accurate? And does that add a different and difficult dimension here?
Yes, and I think it's important to keep in mind that Hamas has been in Qatar at the behest of the United States and indirectly Israel. From the perspective of the US, you'd want an organization like Hamas to be in a country, in a small state where you have one of your biggest air bases abroad, which the US has a few kilometers from where I'm sitting in my home in Doha. So, Hamas has been here indeed, a place where the Americans have been able to keep a watchful eye on them. And of course, their movements have been rather limited. So it's not as if they've had freedom of operation here in Doha.
I just find it so fascinating, Professor, this kind of the mediator role that Qatar has carved out, and not just in this negotiation either. There's been work done by Qatar, for example, on the evacuation of Afghans who worked for the US and other coalition members as well. That happened. There's also a deal that they brokered around getting Ukrainian children, reuniting Ukrainian children with their families after they were separated during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this is a strategic imperative for Qatar. What if the negotiations fail? Would that be damaging in any way, or actually has Qatar manoeuvred itself into a position of such strength that actually outcome is almost irrelevant?
Whenever you engage in mediation, there's always a reputational risk that's involved. If the negotiations fall, the different sides could turn around and blame the negotiator. Or if your bench isn't deep enough in terms of having enough negotiators or having an accurate understanding of the cases. But in this particular case, given that there's been other parties that have been involved, the French, the Egyptians, the Americans, I think Qatar is pretty well covered if the negotiations tragically don't result in an end in the conflict.
You are there, you have closer proximity, I suppose, to certainly the location, geographically, to what's been going on. Is it your analysis, do you feel like what President Biden is saying, that we are closer than ever on an agreement on the war in Gaza, does that feel accurate to you after this latest round of negotiation?
I wish it were accurate. We've been here before. We've been in instances where we thought a deal was within reach, and we've only been disappointed in the past. There is an urgency to the Biden administration wanting the conflict to end on its watch, wanting the war to end and not be part of its historic legacy. But I think there's room for cautious optimism now, as in the previous occasions. We just have to be optimistic and try.
Yeah, optimism, certainly. Really good to speak to you, Professor Kamrava. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's Mehran Kamrava, a professor of government at Georgetown University in Doha, as we say, geographically in close proximity to where these negotiations have been going on, and really helpful insight on the strategic imperative that Qatar, the strategic importance that Qatar has in these negotiations. Really fascinating.
And the important thing about what is said in public and then what is actually happening behind the scenes. Very positive language, obviously, from President Biden. We will see what will happen in the next few days. And of course, we'll follow it here on Times Radio.